Hello, readers. You are in for a treat today. I am going to be interviewing my client and friend, Dixie King, about the release of her beautiful fantasy, Ithia's Dance, the first in the Sun God's Children series. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit up front before Dixie joins us. Here's the blurb about Ithia's Dance. In the city-state of Morura, women are little more than tools for men's ambitions. But Mirie upends the norm of her world when she accidentally awakens Ithia, the dead consort of a god, and unleashes the fury of a high priest who seeks to control the living by eating the souls of the dead. Now the dead are begging Mirie for deliverance. Trapped between a lustful priest, a scheming father, and an ambitious brother, she must navigate a realm where loyalty can be lethal and freedom comes at a staggering cost. Held captive in her father's keep, she finds a path to power in the resilience and resourcefulness of the women around her, including the mother she has never known. But Mirie will have to choose between love, loyalty, and a destiny she never wanted if she is to claim autonomy and preserve her own soul. So I am not exaggerating when I say this is one of my favorite books that I've ever worked on. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Dixie King here today to talk about Ithia's Dance. Hello, Dixie. It's so nice to have you here. We're just about 1 week out from the publication of the first in what I think is going to be a trilogy, The Sun God's Children, Ithia's Dance. So how are you feeling?
Excited, overwhelmed, thrilled. I've gotten a couple of really good independent reviews, and so yeah, I'm kind of on cloud nine right now. My birthday was yesterday. This has been a lovely way to celebrate my birthday.
Yeah, that's so true, especially because you've had a really long journey with this book. You've had this idea for this trilogy for how many years?
Gosh, do I really have to say? Okay, I had a dream back in the mid 90s, and I started to write something and took it to a conference where we did some readings and realized I was telling, I was not showing, and went back and did some rewrites. And then I left it for years and came back to it and left it for years and came back to it and finally got really serious about it about 4 years ago. And then started writing and then met you, and kind of the rest is history. So
Yeah. It's such a good example of how sometimes a story just won't let you go, even though you've been very busy living a very active and full life outside of writing over all of those years. One of the things that I loved about your story and that initially drew me to it is the way that the world building is really informed by your background in cultural anthropology and really in your social justice work as well. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your life outside of writing?
yeah, well, I will start with the fact that, I've been writing since I was 7 years old, taught myself how to type on my dad's Smith Corona, big old metal Smith Corona typewriter, listening to a record that told me where to put my fingers. And I wrote my first novel at 13 and I sent it to Harper and Row. Now, it was about drug trafficking, which I knew nothing about. I was 13. And it was about New York City, which I had never visited. And it was about a woman who worked at the United Nations, which was so unlikely. And Harper and Row not only rejected it, they sent it to the children's editor. I was absolutely mortified. And so I kind of took a 40-year hiatus before I seriously.
Oh
And
my gosh, but that takes a lot of gumption to send something out when you're 13.
hey, it was 125 typewritten pages, and I still have it.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. Have you dared to read it?
I haven't read it in probably 30 years, and I'm going to have to go back and do that now. It would be a lot of fun, I think. Maybe that might be something to put on my website.
Oh, there you go.
So just from that, like this is where I started. But yeah, I decided to become a cultural anthropologist and did. But, it's always been about story. And cultural anthropology for me was very much about life history and working with individuals to understand the lived experience of their lives and how that fit in with the larger cultural picture of who they were and where they lived and their family dynamics and so forth. I did a lot of study about the Middle East and a lot of other cultures, and I got really interested in looking at patriarchy and looking at the ways in which women circumvent patriarchy, not overtly because they get punished for doing it overtly, but covertly, to find those hidden ways to claim their own power. And so this book will people will see some associations with traditional Middle Eastern culture, but it is not. It is not at all. And it, if anything, it falls into some of the stereotypes, and I don't really want that to happen. But the truth of the matter is that women everywhere find ways to survive patriarchy and to survive misogyny. And I've written a book basically about a young woman who's living in an extraordinarily misogynistic society in which women have no power and no voice. And so the question I wanted to explore is the question that really fascinated me as an anthropologist, which is, how do women buck the system when they are very much held captive by it? And women are not powerless. And I want to really say that over and over. The structures and systems try to keep them powerless. But in essence, they have the ability to rise. They have the ability to make choices. Sometimes those choices require literally death. But at the same time, it's a choice. And there is some power in that ability to make those choices. And so that was kind of what I explored as I started to write Ithia.
Mhm. Mhm. And another aspect that I really like is what I think could be considered a really feminine-centric mythological system in the story, that really it makes a nice parallel with what's going on in the physical world.
Yeah, and in the cosmology of my world, there are gods and goddesses, and there is a society that is where my protagonist's mother comes from, where the lineage is through the woman, not through the man. And of course, that's just sacrilegious as far as the Darians are concerned, but that's part of both the attraction that she had, the protagonist's mother had for Maria's father, but also just, I think, kind of lays the foundation for giving Mireille and giving other women some kind of a vision for what it might look like in a very, very different society. And so the question is, and I'll be answering the question in future books, how far does the pendulum swing in the other direction? Does it become basically the antithesis of the misogynistic society that we have in Dar? Or is it fundamentally a more manageable, kind of a more equitable system? And people will have to wait and find out.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and you have a really unflinching examination of some things that I think have a lot of contemporary relevance. Everything really from family planning, or a woman's ability to plan when and how she gives birth, to these ideas of romantic love versus a more transactional or patriarchy dominated romantic relationship. And you're exploring all of those things through the lens of this very young, at least at the beginning of the book, this very young girl who was sort of, at the beginning at least, swimming in the water of the patriarchy and not realizing quite so much some of the things that the older women had learned about the rules of the world and whether they were just or not.
And I love the way you put that, swimming in the waters, because I often use that illusion, ask a fish to describe what water is.
Mhm.
It's ask us to describe what air is, or what even our own cultural understandings are, because we are so enmeshed in them that we don't see them separately from our lived experience. And so, unless it's brought to our attention through a class or through some kind of traumatic experience that we have, or going and visiting a different culture where things are very different, that's how we get to begin to see the water we swim in. And yeah, that's exactly what's happening through a variety of ways. I didn't want it to just be very two dimensional. I really wanted it to be broad. So she's meeting women who have always been in Haratna, always secluded, and they are still finding ways to buck the system, sometimes tragically and sometimes with great force. And then you also have women who come from societies in which they can bear a sword without death being the outcome, other than in a fight. But it's, for a Darian woman, picking up a sword is an automatic death sentence. And so to have sword women come into Haratna is just kind of mind blowing for the women in Haratna. And so there's also that. There's also, what kind of relationships do these women build with each other, and how much respect is there between them when they're coming from such very, very different places? And that gets explored too in the book. I didn't realize, it's funny when you're writing the book, or at least when I'm writing the book, I don't even see all the dimensions I'm putting in it until I start to look at it a little bit later. And, what I thought was a story about patriarchy really ended up being a story about a mother and daughter. And I thought that's really interesting because I didn't plan it that way and I didn't anticipate the turn that it would take moving in that direction. But it really did. And I think it spoke to my own story and the story of a lot of women that I know in terms of trying to make sense of their mothers' lives vis-a-vis their own.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and I often describe revision as a process of excavation, of kind of clearing away the extra dirt and dust to reveal the story that you had planned from the beginning. And of course, you always realize things that you didn't know were going to be important to the story, or even what the story is truly about. You start with this initial spark of an idea that came in a dream 30 years ago, and then it really evolves over time, not just because you're working on it, but because you're out there living life and having experiences that inform the work. So I would imagine if you had finished that book in the 90s, it would have been a very different book than it is now, from even the last 10 to 12 years, which have been
Absolutely.
interesting from a patriarchy perspective.
It had been. And from a personal perspective, in terms of what I've gone through personally, I was with the writer friends this morning and we were talking about that. And I said, I was thinking yesterday about the fact that if I had chosen writing to go forward in writing instead of in cultural anthropology, I could have never written this book. My anthropology very much informs the book, and the experiences that I gathered along the way as a working anthropologist really have helped inform the book. And I couldn't have written it. I would have been a different person. And so maybe I would have written something equally good or better. I don't know. But I love the fact that I've been able to take my life experience, which is what we do as writers, right?
Mhm.
Implicitly or explicitly, whether we're writing memoir or writing fiction. We're taking elements of our lived experience and we're bringing that into the book. Sometimes I did it deliberately and sometimes I did it very accidentally, but I'm there throughout the
Mm.
book.
Yeah. Are you willing to talk a little bit about some of your personal challenges? I think they impacted the ultimate publishing path that you went down, which I think might be of interest to listeners.
Absolutely. I am not a young woman and I am definitely post retirement age. And I have held on to my business, which I love and which I really got a lot of personal satisfaction from, and held on to that and held on to it and held on to it. And then 3 years ago now, I developed a very, very serious autoimmune disease, and it resulted in me losing the ability to use my hands or my feet. I could not walk. I had no feeling in my feet, my hands, or my legs. And I was wheelchair bound for a period of time and then had to slowly come back. And now I had progressed from wheelchair to a standard walker to a rolling walker to a cane, and I am now cane free. I have 98% of my hands back. I only have about 70% of my feet back and probably won't get the rest, but I can walk. And I walk funny, but I walk, which is very
Mhm.
exciting
Yeah.
after what I went through. But it pulled me up short and it needed to. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm really glad it happened because frankly, I was so wonders on moving in the direction of, I want to do this work no matter what. I don't want to let it go. I'm very identified with it. To I couldn't do it for a period of time. I only have the use of one finger on one hand for a period of time. And that was what I was using to type reports, was one finger on one hand. Thank God I had staff that was incredibly supportive and helped me. But, had it not been for them, I would have lost the business. But at the same time, I had to really stop and think, what are my priorities? What is it that I really want to do with my life? And, if I want to be doing this until the day I die, fine. But is that what I want? I love writing. I've been wanting to write, but the job that I had, I was working 40 to 60 hours a week and I just had very little time for writing. So it really changed the course of my life because I had to start reprioritizing and thinking about what was important and what I really wanted to do with my life. And writing came back front and center as both a creative expression, getting me through some of the hardest times during that period, which was, there were times when I was pretty despairing.
Mhm.
But, coming
Mhm.
back and I had the support of some amazing people in my life. And I had been involved with the International Women's Writing Guild from 1999 on, and I had a large number of friends and colleagues through that kind of held me in their arms and got me through some of that period too. And, so I'd always written for the last 30 years I've written, but I've never since stepped out for publication. One of the
Mhm.
interesting things that happened as a result of experiencing a life-threatening illness, because I did come very, very close to dying, was that it not only pulled me up short and made me think about what was important, but it made me realize that I am done with imposter syndrome. I am done with pretending that I'm not who I am or trying to legitimize who I am or be perfect in what I do so that people will be accepting and, and be positive. And I'm sitting here, I have a successful business that I've had for 29 years. Why is it that I still feel that way? In part, it is because of the cultural milieu in which I was born and raised. And,
Mhm.
it's looking at the water. And I've had to look at the water and I've had to really start to think about, okay, there's different kinds of water. Hey, there's different stuff in the water, and let's start looking at what it is I really, really want to do. So I'm delighted that it happened because I don't think I would have finished this novel otherwise. I took this time out to start the revisions because I had pretty much a full draft, but it was a very faulty full draft, as you know, because you worked with me on it. And I started expanding it and started really putting the drywall up and putting the paint in and furnishing it and turning it into what it is now. And I think just that willingness to claim myself as a writer, I've always been, well, because I'm not heavily published, I can't really call myself a writer. Baloney, I'm a writer. That's what I do. And that's part of my identity now. It's part of my soul. And I chose to go with Atmosphere Press. I did send the preliminary chapters of the book out to a handful of agents, and I mean very, very few, maybe 5 to 7 agents. And I got a couple of early rejections, and then I started thinking about it. And when all of this started, I'm 69 years old, and I thought, look, I'm 71 now, just turned 71 yesterday. And I won't have 3 to 4 years to wait to have my first book published. And to get an agent, then to have that agent shop the book, to get a publisher and get it published was going to be a 3 to 4 year process if I was really lucky and really found somebody immediately. And I thought, I will never make it through a trilogy. Yes, and will make you do it this way. So I started looking and I found Atmosphere they're a hybrid, right? And so basically they provide developmental editing, the book cover, and basically every aspect of publishing they handle, but you pay upfront a fee for that. On the other hand, instead of getting 10% of the royalties, I get 90% of the royalty, which is really a nice change. And I was a little bit skeptical, but I went in, I asked a lot of questions. And one of the questions I asked right up front with my first discussion with them is, I can see where you have a vested interest in really working with me up until the publication of the book. But if you're only getting 10% of the royalties and I'm getting 90% of the royalties, what guarantee do I have that you're really going to work with me on the marketing end of it? Because that's where I'm going to need support. And they outlined everything that they do to help with marketing. It still heavily falls on the writer, but it also does with traditional presses now.
Mhm.
So, I looked at that and the price was competitive. They had excellent reviews, met a few other authors, and decided, to take the risk. I have been so happy. I had a developmental editor that I swear knew my characters better than I did. He took me through that process and he only had 4 areas where he recommended changes, but those 4 areas made a huge difference. And I was really, really pleased with that. Also, I had total say in my book cover. I was asked to give examples of book covers that I liked and to give scenes from my book that I thought might translate well into a book cover. I sent that to the team over at Atmosphere, and they sent me back several options, and then I got to pick the one that I wanted. But then I have a friend who's a photographic artist, and she worked with me to modify that to get it exactly where I wanted it. And it's a beautiful cover. I'm really, really excited by that. The marketing has probably been, frankly, the least satisfying part, not because they don't have a really good process in place, because they do, but just because it's a lot of work, establishing my website, starting a newsletter, getting the word out. I'm lucky that, I had a very large mailing list to begin with, large for me, which was, almost 700 people. About 621 have stayed with me, and I have an open rate of between 40 and 50%, which is great. So that's my newsletter. So I'm getting it out on a monthly basis and having fun with it. And I didn't think I would enjoy that part of the process, but I actually have. And then I have a group that I write with every single morning for an hour. And that's most of the time, the only time I get to write is for that 1 hour between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. because of my work. And that's how I'm 5 chapters into the next book. So,
Again.
so it's been a process, but a really unique and fun one. And I'm really glad that I went with Atmosphere Press. My plan at this point is to continue with Atmosphere because I have been so happy with the way that they've worked with me, and the communication has been phenomenal. So,
Mhm, mhm. So let me just contextualize this for our listeners. Dixie is the kind of writer that is both a book coach's dream and nightmare. And let me explain. A dream because her writing is so beautiful and powerful, and difficult because it's so easy to get swept up in the beauty of her prose that you forget you're supposed to be critiquing it. So this was a book that I think easily, had it gone out to more than those 5 to 7 agents, would have eventually gotten picked up and sold in a big 5 deal. But this is the thing that I always want writers to understand. That so many people think like the big 5 is the only dream or the only option or whatever. It doesn't work for everyone. And you had a really, really valid reason for wanting to be on a shorter timeline. And the advantage of that is that we're actually going to get to see this beautiful book 2 and book 3, which might not have happened if you had been on a longer trajectory. So I, for one, am glad that you made that option, and I'm glad that you're happy with it. I've had several clients publish with Atmosphere, and they've all been happy with the service. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about the book jacket? We'll make sure it's in the show notes so that you can see what we're talking about, and tell us about the characters that are on the book jacket and how you conceived of it.
well, and I will say one thing about this, and that's that because my protagonist is 12 when the book opens, people keep wanting to move this toward young adult. This is very adult themes in this book.
Mhm.
And, 16 or 17-year-old, I wouldn't have a problem having them read it, but I would not be having a 12 or a 13-year-old read it. There is sexual violence. It's not highly graphic, but it's definitely there. And I just didn't feel comfortable at all with moving it in any direction other than as adult.
Mhm.
And so I had to fight a little bit, a little bit, because not because people were arguing with me, but because they didn't realize in looking at the fact that it's a young protagonist, oh, well, it must be young adult. Not. So I sent out my book covers that I liked, and mine is considered retro because I do have faces on the front. It's not
Mhm.
these stylized, images, but that is the first thing that everybody tells me when they look at it. And when I take it into independent bookstores and say, I'm interested in selling this because a lot of the independent bookstores will sell them on consignment. And remind me, Julie, you talk about the buyback problem that authors can face, because that's pretty severe too. But at any rate, the first thing people say is, "Oh my God, the cover is so gorgeous." Well, I have my protagonist on the cover, Marianne, with a little sun on her face because she's one of the sun god's children. And then I have this gorgeous Black woman who's on there, who's Ithia. She is the goddess, the consort, one of the winter god, Icor. And then in the background, you just see this image, the bones and the framework of a stag. And Ithia, in that particular scene in the book, brings that stag to life. And so I described that scene, and the artist rendered it for me, and it was just marvelous. What we didn't like about it, my friend, who's the photographic artist, is that they had made Ithia a very small figure in the background, and we wanted her to be up front and close to Mary A, and we wanted it to be a more equalized relationship because Ithia is who gets Mary A in a lot of trouble.
No, it's true. It's true. I mean, this is one of the most powerful scenes from the book. So it's really cool to see it come alive on the cover. And I also just want to point out, if you are the type of writer who really likes to have this kind of artistic input on your cover, that's very difficult to do unless you reach the phase of like superstardom in the big 5 situation. So that can be another advantage of smaller presses or a hybrid press or even indie publishing, is that you get then to have control and say, well, okay, I like these elements, but can you dial this one up and dial this one back? Can you change the font? Can you change the look of the clothing that the characters are wearing? Having that kind of control really, really is important to authors. So some authors. So it's important to know what's important to you, what's a deal breaker, and to choose your publishing path wisely based on that information instead of just having these sort of preconceived notions about what the right path is.
Well, and I have to say that as a reader, it annoys the heck out of me when I see a protagonist who's a blonde on the front of a book and the protagonist is actually chestnut hair, or black hair when you start reading. And it's like the fact that they never even bothered to read before they constructed the cover for a lot of publishers just really bugged me. But the fact that I had so much artistic input was amazing to me. I really did not anticipate that I would get as much as I had. And one thing I do want to mention is the thing about buybacks. And there's flaws, and Atmosphere is very upfront. In fact, you can get a template of their contract right on their website. So it's very, very open. There are different levels that you can pay for. I do not anticipate that I am going to make back on my first novel all of the money that I spent upfront. Now, two things about that. One is because most first-time writers who don't have a following yet don't make a lot of money on their first book. The second book, you start to make more money if, in fact, you've got a good quality product. And so that's what I'm counting on. That's going to help me move in that direction because although I owned a business, I actually gave really good benefits to my employees. And so consequently, I have a pretty anemic IRA. So I don't have unlimited amounts of money to spend. But the other piece is that traditionally, and I have a friend who used to manage a bookstore, so she was able to tell me about this too. If a bookstore orders 20 copies of your book and they sell 3, then they send those other copies back, and you as the author are responsible for buying them back. And they may or may not be in the shape that you can actually resell them. They may be dog-eared, they may be bent up, they could have bent cages. And so I actually know someone who went bankrupt because she was a bestseller in Harlequin, and she went bankrupt when she got so many returns on some of her later books that she had to pay for, that it put her right out of business. So that's one thing. And another thing that people need to understand is that if you are writing a book and publishing articles for that matter, you can claim yourself as a writer on your own taxes, which means that you can write off workshops, you can write off book coaching, you can write off retreats that you go to, travel that you go to if you are promoting your book. And so that's another thing that a lot of people don't know about. And it's helpful because it helps you recoup some of the money that you're spending up front just trying to get your book out there. The one thing I will say is, like a lot of people, a lot of bookstores, I have a little bit of a prejudice about self-published books. Now, mine's a hybrid, which is real close to self-published. But I will say this, I had a really good developmental editor. I worked with a book coach. I worked with beta readers. I worked with critique groups over a long period of time. I really wanted the best product I could put out there. I think we get real bound up in and defensive about our writing. I certainly did for many years. And then it's really hard to hear the feedback. But we need that feedback because we want to put a really good product out there. And the reason that people are very prejudiced against self-published books is because there are a lot of great self-published books out there, and there are a lot of really, really poorly written self-published books out there. And so I just think it's really important to be working with a book coach if there's any way that you can manage it financially, working with beta readers, making sure that you're doing everything you can to ensure that you have a really high quality product. And learning how to let go of the outcome is what I'm trying to learn now, because this may take off and I may get a lot of sales. The likelihood, based on the experience of a lot of good writers that I know, is that I might get some modest sales, but I'm probably not going to make a ton of money on this. Am I doing it to make money, or am I doing it for the love of it? And for me, I'm doing it for the love of it because this is who I am, and I get great satisfaction and enjoyment out of the work that I do and great pride in it. And that to me is worth breaking even. If I could break even on this first book, I'll be delighted.
Absolutely. Yeah. Will you share with our listeners the advice you got about reviews?
Oh, yes. Okay. I was really, really fortunate. I have some blurbs from some best-selling authors, and one of them is Robert Oton, who wrote 2 Bram Stoker Joker winners. And I wrote to him to ask for his address so that I could send him a signed copy of the book, because that was my thank you to him for the blurb that he wrote. And he wrote back, I mentioned that I had a really good review from Reader's Favorite, and he wrote back and he said, "That is fantastic. Good for you." And then he said, "And I'm going to give you my best advice. Do not read the reviews in big capital letters." He said, "Just continue with the great writing and do what you want to do." And another friend kind of extrapolated on that when I told her the story. And she said, "Yeah, what I've been told is your beta readers, your book coach, your developmental editor, boutique groups, the feedback from those people is the feedback you need to take seriously. Reviews that you get from readers are meant for other readers. They're not meant for you." And I thought, wow, I never framed it that way. I can't promise that I won't read reviews that might be well, but I'm a program evaluator by profession, which means that I go out and evaluate people's programs, and I am used to people hating me. Except that as an evaluator, I'm really on their side because I want them to have the best possible product. So I'm giving them feedback that sometimes they love and sometimes they hate. I know that when I get feedback, when I do a training, for example, or I teach a class and I get feedback, I'll get, out of 40 evaluations, I'll get 36 that are fantastic, and then I'll have 4 that are really negative. And where do I spend my time? It's on the 4 negative. Here's what I was told that I want to pass on that I think is really, really good advice. And that's the 20-60-20 rule. 20% of people are going to love whatever you put out there, no matter how bad it is. 60% of the people are going to sit on the fence. They're going to read it. They're going to consider it, and then they're going to make a decision. And 20% are going to hate it, even if you offer them tickets to Paris along with it. And consequently, you want to focus on getting that 60% to join the 20% that are going to love you no matter what. And don't worry about the final 20%, except determine whether or not they have anything to say that you do need to take seriously, then let it go and move on. And I think that would bring it us.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I tell writers all the time, if you're feeling bad about the reviews that you're getting, I mean, I agree with the advice not to read reviews, but I think that most people do anyway, at least in for their first book before they learn to let go, to let that all go. But what I tell people to do is go to your favorite book out there, the one that's the bestseller, that has the movie or the television adaptation, the one that is huge, and you will see there are so many 1-star reviews. So no book is universally loved. So give yourself permission to just like let those negative reviews go. People are expressing their opinion. It's just that, an opinion. There's different tastes for different types of books and different types of writing, and that is okay. And the reviews are there to help your ideal reader find the book, right? So I love to describe Dixie's book as I'd love to comp it to one of my favorite fantasy series, which is the Red Sister series by Mark Lawrence. It's got that feeling of weighty historical fiction, a really nice dash of magic, even though it is actually a second world fantasy, right? It's not necessarily set on this earth. So if that's the type of immersive world building with really nice social justice and feminist bent that you like as a reader, you're going to love Dixie's book. So I recommend that you go out and get it right now. And thank you so much for joining us today, Dixie, and best of luck with book 2 and beyond.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time to talk.